the problem in Cote d'Ivoire is very simple. There were elections held in November 28 of 2010. The elections were full of frauds and in many ways. Two major problems arise. The first one was that the president of the Electoral Commission found himself during the second round, find himself at the hotel where Mr. Alassane Ouattara was staying. He proclaimed the result there after the due date after the elections. He had 3 days to render his verdict, and he did not. So he was disqualified to provide his result. However, he found himself there and pronounced his result, which were not really conform with the overall counting of the voters. In some areas, for instance, he would say, I'm just paraphrasing, he would say that Alassane Ouattara had 800 votes, when in that particular area only 200 registered voters participated. So, you have here some problem. In some areas you would have, for instance, that Mr. Gbagbo did not receive a single vote, when during the first round he received thousands of votes in that particular area. So there were so many problems that rendered these elections not credible. And there were many killings, people were fighting. These elections had nothing democratic to show for. Then there is this order in which the electoral result needed to be validated. First, the Electoral Commission was to give their result. The result was to be validated by the Constitutional Council and then certified by the United Nations representative. When the Electoral Commission president found himself at the hotel of Mr. Ouattara, he gave his result, although they were unacceptable by many standards. The UN representative went and certified it. So he didn't wait for the validation process by the Constitutional Council. So barely, literally, he stepped on, he dismissed the constitutionality of the result given by the Electoral Commission. So in any way, this result couldn't have been accepted by the people. On the other hand, the Constitutional Council canceled the result of many areas, claiming that in these areas there were many frauds and activities that were not acceptable. People were raped, people were killed, people were hurt there, and there were so many frauds. So he made his own judgment and canceled many cities where those incidents occurred. So we have a situation here where the whole international community got involved. Of course, each party had their candidate. Mr. Alassane Ouattara had the most support at the international level. Mr. Gbagbo had the most support at the national level. Now, since they couldn't come up with a final decision, what they needed to do was to sit down, both the president of the Electoral Commission and the president of the Constitutional Council, to find the middle ground to see what to do. In my view, they needed to start the elections over, because anyway, I was not for the elections to be held to begin with, because I thought that the conditions were not right. The country being divided, we couldn't have clean elections. But they did not come together to try to solve the problem. And each party, each candidate basically had his referee, and they were sticking to their decisions to see things degenerate. So it is not that Mr. Alassane Ouattara was not a good person, or Mr. Gbagbo was not a good person. It's just that the bodies in charge of the elections did not take their responsibility to prevent the clash that took place after the refusal from both parties to accept either the result of the Electoral Commission or the result of the Constitutional Council. So these things escalated primarily because the President of the Electoral Commission and the President of the Constitutional Council did not agree on the fact that it was very important for them to resolve this matter before it gets out of hand. So now you have the international community saying that the result of the Electoral Commission are the right one, and they stick by it, and Mr. Gbagbo has to leave. Mr. Gbagbo says that he did not lose the elections because the Constitutional Council has invested in him as a new president. Now, who is to leave? Well, that's where wisdom comes in, and I don't think that the international community, made out of a few European countries, United States, and the African Union and so forth, used common sense. I'm speaking, I weight my words, because look at now where we are. Many people died, the entire village was burned up, and the international community managed to get a resolution to destroy Mr. Gbagbo's arsenal. In doing so, they plundered the presidential palace and killed over 300 people. People who were just there to pray, to support the president, were unharmed. Young people were just there to pray and support the president. Were all killed when the French-led UN coalition went to bombard the presidential palace. This was totally uncalled for, and in any way, the result cannot be accepted. I do not accept this result. Therefore, I do not accept Mr. Ouattara's supposed victory. And Mr. Gbagbo, being so pressed by everybody, had no choice but to remain in his compound until the military came in and killed everybody around him and took him as a war prisoner. Now, let me remind you that the country of Cote-D'Ivoire did not organize the elections to go to war. It was not a war issue. It was a democratic exercise. So therefore, they can't claim that His Excellency President Gbagbo is a war criminal, a war prisoner. No. The situation escalated because the international community didn't have the wisdom enough to know that we were in a very critical situation where force didn't need to intervene, because if they used force, people were going to die unnecessarily, and the situation was going to be out of hand, which is exactly what happened. Thousands of people died, and they tried to blame it on the person who was claiming who was asking everybody else to sit down and talk. He was not up there to say fight. He said, let's count. They did it in the United States between Al Gore and George Bush. When this crisis arose in the United States, no one asked George Bush to leave office. No one offered him a job as an executive in an oil-based company. No one went to bombard the White House while he was there and to arrest his wife and his children and beat up his ministers. No one did all these things. There was no resolution to come to bombard the United States, the White House. But the same thing happened in Cote-D'Ivoire, and France and Nigeria. They did everything to get an African brother into this thing. So France rushed to the United Nations to get a resolution and use that resolution, abuse the resolution, because the resolution was simply to go to destroy the weapon that supposedly were used by Gbagbo to kill his own people. First, the Security Council did not make any investigation as to whether or not Mr. Gbagbo had this weapon. If they did, we would have seen it, because this result should have been published at the Journal of the United Nations. Now, they didn't do this investigative work. There was no report. They didn't know the whereabouts of this weapon. So they went on and started shooting at people as if Cote d'Ivoire was not inhabited by human beings. So to me, they are liable. The United Nations and France are liable for the killing of the Ivorian people, and these elections have to be cancelled. The National Assembly must take over the helm of the country. Mr. Alassane Ouattara has shown clearly that he is not fit to rule the country, because he wants to rule by force, by fear, by terror. And this behavior has been consistent, and there's no way that he is going to run this country and to reconcile the country when his only option, when he's faced with a challenge, is to use force. Cote d'Ivoire has been a country of peace and solidarity and cohesion. We've been able to live peacefully without ever using force. And he comes in for the first time in the history of the country for some electoral problems and get the international community to go to bombard the presidential palace and people die. What kind of credibility is he going to get? And among the sanctions that he inflicted on the people of Cote d'Ivoire were the embargo on drugs, on medicine. Many people die as a result of that. What does medicine have to do with elections? People are sick; they need to have access to their drugs. But Mr. Ouattara cut down on the supplies, on a false pretense. He precluded people from having access to their funding by closing the banks. So many irrational decisions were made, and mind you, all the ordinances and decisions that he made to form a government and to reconcile, to bring the army together and so forth, were not done constitutionally. There is no legal basis in every decision that he took since he proclaimed himself president, because he was not under oath by the Constitutional Council. So we have to see here who we're dealing with. We're dealing with someone who has no respect for the constitution of the country that he wants to run. We're dealing with someone who is using violence and to blame it on other people. And we're dealing with someone who has no consideration for the people of the people of the country. So to me, these elections shouldn't have been held. And the failure of elections showed that I was right. The use of force, the excessive use of force, the abuse and so forth shows that this election definitely shouldn't have happened. And the false arrest of Mr. of Gbagbo is also clearly shows that these elections shouldn't have happened, because Mr. Gbagbo has fought for democracy to come in that country. He's been the pioneer of democracy in multi-parties in Cote d'Ivoire. And if he had if he had used weapon, he wouldn't have been here today. This fight that he fought against Houphouët-Boigny lasted over 40 years. And if he never used weapon to try to convince Mr. Houphouët-Boigny to open up the field for other candidates to run for elections, so there is here this tendency, this propensity by Mr. Alassane Dramane Ouattara to think that he is the saint and everybody else around him is a bad guy who kills people. Amnesty International find out that in Douekwe, where many people were burned, these things happened under the watch of Mr. Ouattara. It was his people who went to burn the people in the hospital in that village, And there are so many things like this that are not covered by the news because he has this ability to pay the news and to maneuver and so forth to cover up himself. But we know in Cote d'Ivoire what he has done, what he's capable of, and his propensity of using force clearly indicates that he is, behind the destructive forces that are, increasing the rate of mortality since the beginning of this electoral campaign. So my appeal to you is to believe that these elections must be cancelled, and I'm calling for the release, automatic release, unconditional release of Mr. Gbagbo, the compensation of Mr. Gbagbo by the United Nations, by France, because they have done nothing to deserve this. Some ministers were killed, some of these people were killed for no reason, for an electoral process. It doesn't make sense. And so we have to start all this all together. And by the way, it was because of Mr. Gbagbo that Mr. Alassane Dramane Ouattara received his green card for Cote d'Ivoire. We don't have green card, but his residency permit, because Alassane Dramane Ouattara had no paper when he came to Cote d'Ivoire. He's not a national of Cote d'Ivoire. It was Mr. Gbagbo who wrote a special provision for Mr. Alassane Dramane Ouattara to have this residency permit. And it's also Mr. Gbagbo who wrote a special ordinance to allow for Mr. Ouattara to run for office. He's not grateful for all these things, and then it goes to call the international community to come to bomb a poor, friendly country. We can't accept that. So he has shown what he is capable of in a very short period of time, and it is additively negative, and we cannot accept it. Thank you.